I am 32 years old, and this story begins in the small pine-fringed town of Millersburg, nestled somewhere between forgotten railroad tracks and worn-out traditions. I grew up there, mud on my boots, wind in my lungs, and heart to full for. The place I called home. Christmas used to mean peppermint pies cooling on windowsills, church bells echoing through frostbitten trees, and string lights weaved through wooden porches. But the Christmas I remember most didn't smell of cinnamon or joy. It reeked of betrayal. You see, once upon a time, I was supposed to marry Jack Harper. He was the local dream, tall, quiet, dependable. We'd planned our future on the porch of his father's farmhouse, sipping cider and watching deer cross the creek at dusk. Folks around town said we were meant to be, but life, especially in Millersburg, has a way of twisting sweet things into bitter ones. Enter Catherine Lynn, my cousin. Blonde curls, easy charm, and the kind of manipulative sweetness that could pass for innocence if you didn't know better. She and I had grown up like sisters, shared secrets, shoes, and sunburns. But I should have known not to share hearts. 3 weeks before my wedding, Jack called it off. No explanation, just a solemn face and a folded letter I never opened. He stopped showing up to Sunday service. Catherine, meanwhile, played the grief-stricken cousin until word spread that she and Jack had eloped to the next county. Wearing rings I helped her pick out from a catalog. They bought a farm on the edge of town with Jack's inheritance. Big red barn, white fences, and land that stretched far enough to forget how they got it. I didn't step foot near that land again for over a decade. Instead, I left Millersburg with a duffel bag and a broken spine of dreams. I waited tables in Alabama, studied crop management under flickering gas lamps, and worked for a rancher in Oklahoma who paid me in experience and cornbread. I told myself I'd return when the ache no longer burned. When Jack Harper's name stopped echoing in my ribs, when Catherine Lynn's laugh no longer made my stomach twist, that day came on the 20th of December, 10 years after they'd broken me. The invitation didn't come in gold foil or formal writing. It was a hand-scrawled letter from Catherine, her ink blotchy with tears. Or maybe desperation. Hannah, I know I'm the last person you want to hear from, but we're in trouble. The farm's in foreclosure. Jack is unwell. I wouldn't ask if I wasn't desperate. Please. Catherine, desperation has a scent. It smells like unpaid taxes, failing crops, and a marriage held together with frayed threads. But it wasn't just desperation that moved me. It was timing, because Catherine didn't know I'd spent the last 6 years working under Martha Ellington, a cattle magnate, who owned land in 3 states and had a soft spot for girls like me. She didn't know I'd earned my own wealth acre by acre, and recently come into a quiet fortune after Martha passed away and left me $5 million and a list of properties she wanted protected from greedy hands. One of those properties? The Harper farm. I had already purchased it through silent escrow. I was the legal owner, and I hadn't told a soul, not yet. So when Catherine begged for help, when she called me her only hope, I smiled, not with cruelty, but with clarity, because this Christmas, I would walk into that farmhouse again, but not as the jilted bride. The landlord, and by midnight, they'd be gone. The drive back to Millersburg was a quiet one, just the crunch of gravel beneath tires and the hum of my thoughts rattling louder than the engine. December skies hung low and heavy, like they were waiting for something to crack. I passed the old feed store, boarded up now, and the diner where I once wore pink aprons and served Jack cherry pie. Every building in this town whispered ghosts, some too loud to ignore. But I didn't return as a ghost. I returned as an owner. The Harper farm came into view just before dusk. Same red barn, though the paint had begun to chip. The white picket fence leaned now, tired from years of neglect. What once looked like a postcard now looked like a regret. I parked the truck and waited. Catherine came running out first, bundled in a wool coat too thin for the wind. Her hair was longer now, duller than I remembered, but she wore the same saccharine smile, one that could convince a dying man he was fine. Hannah, she called. Thank God. I thought you might not come. I stepped out, boots crunching on frozen dirt. You always did know how to get my attention, Cat. She hesitated at the nickname. I hadn't called her that since we were girls chasing fireflies with mason jars. But she hugged me anyway, too tightly, like she needed something to hold on to. She smelled like lavender and panic. Inside, the house was dim. The fireplace crackled with half-burned logs. No decorations, no tree, no music. Just Jack, sitting in a chair by the window, older and thinner than I remembered. His hair had grayed at the temples, and a long scar traced his left cheek like a memory etched in skin. He didn't speak, just looked at me, and I looked right back. Catherine poured sweet tea like we were still kin. She tried to smile through the tension, but her eyes darted between us like she expected a storm to break through the walls. She started talking fast about foreclosure papers, about medical bills, about how Jack hadn't worked since the tractor accident, about how banks were vultures and the neighbors had stopped coming by. I wouldn't ask if we weren't drowning, she said, voice trembling. I know I don't deserve your kindness, but you've always had a good heart. I sipped the tea. It was bitter. I can help, I said finally. Catherine's shoulders dropped in relief. Oh, thank you. I promise we'll pay it back just enough to buy time, to fix things. You don't even have to. I already bought the farm, I said. The room went still, even the fire seemed to quiet. Jack's eyes narrowed, as if trying to read a sentence he'd never seen before. I bought it months ago. Quiet sale. Martha Ellington left me everything, and this was one of the properties she didn't want swallowed up by the banks. Catherine's mouth parted, but no sound came. You own it? Jack asked, voice raspy. Yes, I said. And I'm not here to collect rent. What does that mean? Catherine's voice cracked. I stood. It means you have until midnight to gather your things. She shook her head. You can't do this, Hannah. Please. We're family. No, I said. You made that choice the day you wore white to the church that was supposed to marry me. Jack flinched. I continued slowly, clearly. This Christmas, the girl you both discarded returned, and now she owns the home you built on betrayal. Catherine fell to her knees, tears spilling. Please, we have nowhere to go. I looked down at her, not with hate, but with justice. There's a shelter 2 towns over. I hear they're warm and kind and don't sleep with people's fiancés. Jack stood then, shoulders slumped in defeat. You're really doing this? I'm not doing anything, I said, walking to the door. You did it to yourselves. Outside, snow had begun to fall, soft, quiet, pure, but inside that house, the past was finally being evicted. I didn't look back as I stepped outside. The door shut behind me with the soft thud of closure, the kind that echoed deeper than sound ever could. Snowflakes drifted down, catching in my hair, melting against the heat still rising in me, not anger, but justice. I climbed into the truck, resting my hands on the steering wheel. Inside the farmhouse, I could see Catherine sobbing on the floor and Jack slumped in the same chair he used to read our wedding vows from before he decided. I was too quiet, too cautious, too not her. And now, here we were, Christmas Eve. I was no longer the girl left in church pews and tear-stained journals. I was the woman who owned their tomorrow. I didn't drive off yet. Instead, I waited. At 11:43 p.m., the porch light flickered on. Catherine stepped out first, carrying 2 duffel bags. Her coat was unzipped, and the cold made her skin pale. Jack followed, slower, dragging a single suitcase. His limp was worse than I remembered. No words were spoken, no goodbyes exchanged. They made it to the truck parked along the dirt road, some old pickup that wheezed like it hadn't seen oil in a year. I watched as they pulled away, tail lights blinking red through the falling snow, until they vanished around the bend near Old Mill Road. I waited 10 more minutes. Silence settled in again, as if the land itself took a breath. Then, I stepped out and walked slowly toward the porch. My boots crunched against the frostbitten grass, past the broken wind chimes and forgotten planters. I unlocked the front door and stepped into the house that once belonged to people who broke me, and now belonged to me. The fireplace still glowed, softly, like it remembered what warmth was meant to feel like. I moved through each room slowly, touching surfaces as if greeting ghosts. The dining table where Jack once carved a roast and smiled at me like I was everything. The hallway where I first overheard Catherine telling her friend I wasn't right for him anyway. The guest bedroom where I cried for 3 nights after the wedding invitation arrived with her name beside his. All of it, frozen in memory, but no longer mine to suffer under. I opened the drawer beneath the entry table and pulled out a manila envelope. Inside were the transfer deeds, final signatures, and the letter from Martha Ellington, the estate broker who had helped me buy the property under a holding company's name. She had written one line at the bottom in cursive: owning isn't revenge, but peace. That's yours now. I smiled. Martha had been right. I didn't come back to punish them. I came back to free myself. But sometimes peace looks like poetic justice. I made my way to the attic. ID hadn't changed. Dust-covered boxes lined the edges, filled with memories neither of them had touched in years. I found one with my name on it, Hannah, written in marker by Catherine's hand. Inside were trinkets from when we were kids. A broken music box, a photo of us riding bikes down Cedar Hill Lane, a Christmas ornament shaped like a star, chipped at the corner. It didn't make me cry. It made me laugh. Time has a funny way of sanding down the sharpest betrayals until they're just lessons. I took the ornament downstairs and placed it gently on the mantel. Then I lit every candle I could find, turning the old house into a flickering shrine of new beginnings. The clock ticked closer to midnight. Christmas was about to begin, and this time, I wasn't on the outside looking in. The next morning, I woke up to sunlight slipping through the old wooden blinds. For the first time in years, I wasn't waking up in a cramped apartment alone. I was waking up in the same house where I'd once been heartbroken, and now, I owned it. My first morning on the farm as its rightful owner, I brewed a pot of coffee in the kitchen. The counter still had a small chip in the marble from when Jack and I had tried to cook together one Thanksgiving. Burnt stuffing, laughter, the kind of memory that once made my heart ache. Now, it just passed through me like a breeze. I stood at the window, mug in hand, staring out over the frozen fields. The barn's roof shimmered with fresh snow. The stable doors creaked with wind. This land had once meant security, a dream that was stolen when I was replaced at the altar and erased from my own future. Until now, later that afternoon, I drove into Fairhollow, the small town just 15 minutes from the property. Folks there hadn't seen me since the scandal, when whispers about me being unstable and too dramatic had made their rounds. It's strange how quickly towns pick sides and how rarely they question why they were told to. But now, as I stepped into the general store, heads turned for a different reason. I wasn't in tears. I wasn't hiding. I was in a crisp coat, polished boots, and confidence that made people sit up straight. Mrs. Callahan, the clerk who used to give me candy when I was 10, gasped softly. "Well, I'll be," she murmured. "Hannah Brooks. Back in town?" I nodded. "Just visiting the farm." "The Patterson place?" "Not anymore." I smiled. "It's the Brooks place now." The air shifted. A man behind me whistled low. "Heard someone bought it out last month." That someone was me, and with that, I picked up a basket of supplies: fresh linen, candles, ribbon, and a carved wooden sign I'd ordered weeks earlier under a different name. It read, "Brooks Acres Established in Grace." On my way out, I passed the old church where Jack and I were supposed to marry. I parked my car and walked inside. It was empty, save for the faint scent of pine and worn hymnals. I sat in the front pew. This was where it all changed, where I waited in my white dress, where Catherine came to me with tears in her eyes, saying Jack had chosen her instead, that he was already on his way to the courthouse with her. I didn't plan it. She'd whispered that day. It just happened. But betrayal doesn't just happen. It's sewn thread by thread. I closed my eyes now and breathed in deep. "I forgive you both," I whispered into the empty church. But forgiveness didn't mean forgetting. Forgiveness meant letting go of the weight. By evening, I was back at the farmhouse. I hung the wooden sign on the front gate, tied with a red bow. I decorated the tree in the living room with ornaments both old and new. And then, I called a lawyer. "Miss Brooks," he answered, right on time. "Did you want to proceed with the clause?" "Yes," I said. "Make sure the buyout clause stands. No contest. No delays. And the eviction notice? Deliver it in the morning. I want them out by midnight." There was silence on the line. "Understood." Before bed, I walked the perimeter of the house one more time. Snow crunched underfoot. Moonlight made the fields sparkle. I stood still, arms wrapped around myself. I had given them everything once: my heart, my loyalty, even silence. Now, I was taking back what was mine, not out of spite, but because some stories don't need revenge. They just need closure that feels like it. And sometimes that closure looks like a signature on a deed and the sound of a moving truck leaving on Christmas Eve. By noon the next day, the wind had picked up. Snow dusted the driveway like powdered sugar, and just as I was finishing a second cup of coffee, I heard the sound of tires crunching gravel. A car was approaching, a familiar one, Catherine's white sedan, the one I remembered all too well. The car she used to drive to the church instead of me. The car Jack used to pick her up from work while I was still trying to heal. I didn't go outside. I waited, let them walk to my door. A knock came, 3 taps, hesitant. I opened it slowly, the warmth of the fire crackling behind me casting a golden light over the wood floors. Catherine stood in a beige coat, her hair a bit thinner than I remembered. Her cheeks wind-burnt and pale. Behind her, Jack held a box. He looked tired, thinner. The confident shine in his eyes had dulled. "Hannah," Catherine said, forcing a smile. We weren't sure if it was really you who bought the place." "It's me," I replied flatly. She blinked. "We heard rumors. But you didn't return my call." "I didn't need to. The paperwork speaks for itself." Jack stepped forward, lips chapped. "The lawyer said we have until tonight to move out." "That's correct." Catherine's mouth fell open. "You can't be serious. It's Christmas Eve." "That's exactly why I'm serious. You can't do this," she said, stepping inside without invitation. "This was our home." "No," I corrected. "This was my dream, my home, my life. You just borrowed it for a few years." Her face flushed. "I was your family. I'm still your cousin. And you're still the woman who stood in my wedding dress and married my fiancé." Jack flinched. I continued. "I rebuilt my life from scratch, while the two of you danced in the ashes of mine. And now I'm simply returning the favor, legally." Catherine sat down without asking. "We have nowhere to go. The boutique failed. The savings are gone. Jack's job laid him off. I didn't move. And you want what sympathy? I'm asking for time." "No," I said. "You're asking me to forget what it felt like to be humiliated, to hear the laughter behind my back, to see you living the life I was supposed to have." She looked down. "I didn't know it would ruin us." "You didn't care." There was silence, just the fire and the faint whistle of wind through the chimney. Then Jack spoke. "You're different, Hannah. Colder." "I'm not colder," I said, voice calm. "I'm clear." They stayed seated for a moment longer, until I picked up an envelope from the mantel and handed it to Catherine. "What's this?" she asked. "The official notice. You have until midnight to vacate. That's 12 hours. After that, the locks change and any remaining possessions are considered abandoned." Her hands trembled as she opened it. "You can't." "I can. And I have." Catherine stood, folding the letter slowly. Her voice dropped to a whisper. "You were always the quiet one, Hannah. Always the one who watched from the corner." "Exactly." I nodded. "And while you were busy stealing, I was learning, planning, becoming the kind of woman who doesn't beg, she buys." Jack didn't say another word. He simply turned and walked out the front door, snow already dusting his shoulders. Catherine followed, her head bowed. As the door shut behind them, I stood in the silence of the living room. I looked around at the mantel, the photos I'd placed there earlier that week, and the deed resting beside a bowl of fresh pine cones. The home was mine again, but more importantly, so was my peace. I didn't need applause. I didn't need revenge shouted from rooftops. I just needed them to know on Christmas Eve, of all nights, that some wounds don't make you weaker. They sharpen your edges. They make you unstoppable. That night, the snow fell thicker than it had in years. The kind of snow that blanketed everything in white silence, hiding the past like a clean sheet of paper. By p.m., I saw the moving truck arrive, old, rusted, and barely holding together. Jack loaded boxes in silence, his breath fogging in the cold. Catherine wasn't helping. She stood near the porch, arms crossed, wrapped in a long gray coat I recognized. It used to be mine. Funny how many things she used to call hers had once belonged to me. I stayed inside, not out of cruelty, but to give them space to say goodbye, not to me, but to the life they build on betrayal. But it didn't stop them from trying. Around p.m., there was another knock. I opened the door to find Catherine alone this time. Her lips were pale, her eyes ringed red. "Can I come in?" she asked softly. I hesitated, then stepped aside. She entered, her boots leaving faint tracks on the rug. "Jack's outside," she said, as if that would make me feel better. "I don't care where he is," I said. "This is about you." She sat slowly on the couch, across from the fire that crackled with quiet confidence. "This place was always your dream," she murmured, eyes scanning the familiar wood panels. "I remember the first time you brought me here. You were so excited about the vineyard, about building something from scratch. And you remember the second time?" I asked. She looked down. "Yes, the wedding, my wedding." Her hands clenched in her lap. "I didn't mean to fall in love with him, Hannah. You didn't mean not to either." "I was weak," she whispered, "and jealous. You had everything, the love, the peace, the future, and you took it all." She didn't deny it. "I got pregnant 6 months after the wedding," she said. And I thought that would fix things, that having his child would justify it all. But Jack never loved me the way he loved you. I see that now. I stayed silent, letting her feel the weight of her confession. I guess I just wanted what you had. But I didn't know it came from who you are, not what you had. There it was, not remorse, not really regret. I came tonight, she continued, not to beg you to stop what you're doing. I know it's done. I want to say thank you. For what? For showing me what strength really looks like. I almost laughed, but I didn't, because despite everything, her voice was steady, honest even. You're not the same girl I betrayed, she said. You're something else now, something stronger. I had to be, I replied. You left me no choice. We sat for a moment, the fire casting flickers of light on her tired face. I'll leave tonight, she said, standing. You deserve the home, the land, everything. I hope you find someone who deserves you. And with that, she walked out, for good. The house was quiet again. I went upstairs to the master bedroom, my bedroom, and looked out the window. The barn was dark, the grapevines lined like sleeping soldiers under snow. The moon rose above the hills, silent and soft, and for the first time in 10 years, I felt still, not happy, not sad, just free. 2 days after they moved out, the house was quieter than ever before, not silent in a lonely way, but peaceful like the calm that settles after a long storm finally breaks. I woke early and walked the land in tall boots, watching the wind dance over snow-covered vines. The farm hands who used to work under Jack had stayed. I doubled their wages the moment I signed the deed. Some were surprised, some weren't. Word had already spread in town Hannah Brooks owns the Briar Ridge farm now. The name would change soon. Brooks Estate and Vineyard. My name, my legacy. In town, people treated me differently. Not just because I was wealthier than I once was, but because I had come back. Because I had done what most only dream of. I'd turned pain into purpose. At the general store, I ran into Mrs. Gladys, the town's gossip queen. She leaned over the counter and whispered, "So it's true, dear? You're the new queen of Briar Ridge?" I smiled politely. I just bought back what should have never been taken. She nodded knowingly. I always said you were the strong one. Funny. No one ever said that to me back when I was curled up in bed after Jack left. No one said that when I buried my dreams beneath their wedding bells. But now, strength was the word everyone clung to, as if it had always been there, as if they hadn't doubted me too. That night, I unlocked a room I hadn't entered in a decade, the small upstairs guest room with green curtains and a cedar chest. This was the room I stayed in when Jack brought me here for the first time to meet his family. Before he told me he loved me, before he promised forever, I opened the cedar chest. Inside were old photo albums, receipts, hand-drawn plans for the vineyard, some in my handwriting, some in his. Proof that I was always part of the dream, even if they tried to erase me. But tucked at the bottom was something else, a sealed envelope with my name written on it in Catherine's handwriting. I opened it, my hands trembling slightly. Inside was a letter. Hannah, if you're reading this, then I couldn't say it to your face. I'm sorry for everything. For Jack, for the lies, for the years I let envy poison what little love we had left as cousins. You deserved better from both of us. If I could go back, I would have walked away from him the moment I saw the way he looked at you. But I was selfish. I hope, one day, you'll find peace. And I hope, when you do, it's in the home we both once dreamed of. Make it yours, fully. No ghosts, no regrets, just your future. Catherine. I sat on the floor, letter in hand, for what felt like hours. Not because I forgave her, but because a piece of me needed to know she'd felt it too. The guilt, the regret, the knowledge that her choices had torn everything apart. Forgiveness? Not yet, but maybe someday. The next morning, I had the front gate of the property painted. The old rusted arch that once said Briar Ridge now bore a new name, Second Harvest, because sometimes the first season rots, withers, and dies. But with the right care, the right timing, and a bit of grace, a second harvest can be sweeter than the first. And this was my season. I had just started the renovations when word reached me Jack and Catherine were staying in a motel on the outskirts of town. No money, no credit, no options. The boutique Catherine had opened after their wedding was shut down months ago. Jack's reputation as a businessman had been tarnished ever since his shady vineyard deal collapsed. And the best part, they had no idea who had bought their beloved farm. I hadn't revealed my identity the night I handed them the eviction letter. I had signed it as Second Harvest Holdings LLC. Jack, always distracted, probably never noticed. Catherine had been too stunned by the cash offer to ask questions, but curiosity finds everyone eventually. On Christmas Eve, just after sunset, I received a letter delivered by hand, no envelope. Just a folded page tucked under a ribbon of red silk. The handwriting was unmistakable. Catherine, please, we have nowhere else to go. Just let us stay in the guest house until New Year's. You are always kinder than me. Let your heart remember that, even if your mind can't forgive. I know it was you. I stared at the letter for a long while. Then quietly, I folded it and placed it in the fireplace. The flames consumed her plea before I turned to my glass of mulled wine. This wasn't bitterness. This was boundaries. I had built something alone, through pain, through rejection, through silence and struggle, and now, the silence felt like peace. Later that night, I walked the property. The vines glistened under moonlight, kissed with frost. Inside the barn, fairy lights twinkled as the staff finished setting up for the Christmas banquet I was hosting. Not for family, not for neighbors, but for the girls from the youth shelter in Millbrook, the same place I stayed for 3 weeks. After leaving town, some were only 14, others closer to 20, but they all had the same look in their eyes I once had. Loneliness dressed up as toughness. As the girls entered, wide-eyed and giggling, I welcomed each one by name. I had bought them winter coats, gift boxes, and shoes. We served cranberry roast, cinnamon rolls, and fresh apple pie from our orchard, and then I stood on the small stage in the barn loft and shared just a little of my story, not the betrayal or the heartbreak, just the part where I reminded them, they don't get to decide who you become, you do, and one day, you might even buy the ground they buried you under. The girls clapped, some cried, one shouted, "You're like a real boss lady." I laughed for the first time in days. After the banquet, I returned to the main house, removed my heels, and curled up on the couch. I thought about Jack's broken promises, about the family who turned a blind eye, and about Catherine now homeless, jobless, and no longer the queen of a kingdom she stole. That was the final twist of fate. I hadn't just bought the farm. I had bought their ending, and rewritten it with my name. Tomorrow, I would have the legal documents framed and hung above the mantel, not out of spite, but as a reminder that every woman they tried to break became the woman who bought the table, the chairs, and the floor they begged on. Christmas morning dawned with a quiet grace over Maple Hill Farm. Snow had settled overnight, blanketing every vine, rooftop, and gravel path like nature's apology letter. I stood by the frost-laced window of the farmhouse's sunroom, sipping on coffee and watching the morning unfold, calm and clean like the first page of a new chapter. I had no intention of responding to Catherine's letter, but still, I thought about her, about the way she used to laugh too loudly at Jack's jokes, the way she twirled her wine glass like she owned every room she walked into, and how, even after marrying the man I was supposed to spend my life with, she always found a way to play the victim. But now, the masks were gone. There were no more parties, no more champagne, no more boutique openings where she flaunted her ring like a medal. There was just reality, and it didn't come with sequins or applause. As I walked the hallway of the farmhouse, I passed the old portrait still hanging above the staircase. It was a painting of the original owners, Elliot and Marie Granger. I had done my research when buying the property. Marie Granger, it turned out, had been the first female vintner in the county. She fought every inch of her way into the business during a time when women weren't welcome in boardrooms or on barrels. Her legacy now lived through me. I paused and whispered, "We made it, Marie." Downstairs, the staff was already preparing the holiday brunch. I had invited no family, just my business team, the youth shelter girls, and the elderly couple who used to work the fields before the farm was sold off. Around them, a black sedan pulled into the driveway. I watched from the window as Catherine stepped out, dressed in worn boots and a heavy, borrowed coat. Jack followed, looking 10 years older, his shoulders hunched like a man carrying the ghosts of every bad decision. I didn't need to ask why they were here. The front door rang. I took a long breath before answering. There stood Catherine, cheeks flushed from cold and something else, shame perhaps. Jack stayed 2 steps behind her. "Hannah," she said softly, we have nowhere to go." I let the silence stretch, deliberate and measured. Catherine continued, "I know what I did. I know I don't deserve anything from you. But Jack's sick. And I'm tired. I'm just tired. I glanced at Jack, whose face was as pale as the snow. I have a cabin, I finally said. It's at the edge of the property. 1 bedroom. No heat unless you chop wood. No maid. No wine cellar. Catherine blinked. You mean we can stay? I gave her a look that stopped her smile mid-bloom. You'll pay rent. And the lease ends January to end. Her lips parted. Hannah, it's not for you. I cut in. It's for the man I once loved. And because despite everything, I'm still not you. She said nothing. As they turned to leave, Jack hesitated. He met my eyes, and for a fleeting second, I saw the man I once trusted. The man who whispered promises he never planned to keep. I'm sorry, he said quietly. I know, I replied, but that doesn't change anything. They disappeared into the white veil of snow, 2 ghosts swallowed by their own consequences. I closed the door, turned the key, and leaned my back against the frame. That moment right there wasn't revenge. It was restoration. Christmas isn't always about forgiveness. Sometimes it's about reclaiming the peace someone tried to steal from you, and wrapping it around your soul like a warm coat. I had chosen myself, and that was the real gift. The sun dipped lower on Christmas Day, casting long golden shadows over the vineyards I now called mine. The same land that once held the memories of a different girl, a different future, one where I had imagined Jack standing beside me, where my cousin Catherine was just family, not a thief of love and dignity. But that girl was gone, and in her place stood a woman carved from heartbreak, stitched together with grit and resolve. After Catherine and Jack settled into the distant cabin, silent and stunned, I returned to the house. I poured myself a glass of the estate's finest red, the very vintage Jack once claimed would put his name on the national map. The irony of drinking it now, as sole owner, was not lost on me. That evening, I hosted the Christmas dinner I had dreamed of for years, not one filled with flashy decor or hollow toasts, but with honest laughter, shared stories, and people who had earned their place at the table. There was Carol, the elderly housekeeper who once comforted me after Catherine's engagement announcement, and Tom, the vineyard foreman who trained me secretly when I worked here in disguise 2 years ago, using a fake name and a baseball cap pulled low. Most importantly, there were the 12 teenage girls from the shelter I now sponsored. They had never stepped foot inside a mansion. Their eyes sparkled at the candlelight, and when I gave them each a monogrammed robe and a key to their new dorm wing, one of them cried, "You don't have to earn love," I told them gently, "but you do deserve it." Later that night, I stood in the old cellar-turned-office, with a thick leather folder in my hands. Inside was the signed contract, the one that gave me ownership of Catherine's boutique business. She hadn't realized that my holding company was behind the purchase until the ink dried, and she certainly didn't know that I had renamed the brand to something deeply personal. Phoenix Vine, a nod to the ashes I rose from, and the vineyard that became my rebirth. There would be no second chances for Catherine in the business world. I had already fired her publicly on Christmas Eve through a press release, but I didn't humiliate her. That wasn't my style. I simply ended it and let the silence speak louder than revenge. At midnight, I lit a single candle and placed it by the window, a tradition my mother once taught me. It meant someone was always welcome. That kindness still had a home, but this time, the door stayed locked, because forgiveness is not a requirement, it's a gift. One I wasn't ready to give. Not yet. Jack and Catherine would leave the cabin in 7 days. The lease was short, intentional. I wanted them to feel the cold, to remember. I wrote in my journal that night, I was never weak. I was wounded, and wounds heal if you let them turn into wisdom. As the snow whispered against the windows and the wind curled through the empty halls, I tucked myself into bed and let the silence soothe me. Not the silence of abandonment, but the silence of completion. I had closed the loop, on love, on betrayal, on Christmas, and I didn't need anyone to tell me I won, because I already knew it in my bones. Reflection questions. Do you believe forgiveness is necessary for closure? Was Hannah right to help Catherine and Jack, even after all they did? Can pain be used as fuel for personal growth? Subscribe to more revenge stories. Share, like, comment.